How did a single congregation grow to become one of the largest and most influential churches in America, only to experience a cataclysmic decline that placed its very existence in doubt? How did that same church endure a brutal and painful season of change to emerge from the transition stronger, more united, and more committed than ever to Jesus' Great Commission? I want to tell you this story. This is a story about the way ministry is changing in a new and harsher world, painfully different than the one known by our parents and grandparents. It's a story for pastors who face the daunting task of leading their churches through necessary but excruciating seasons of transition so they can move from surviving to thriving. This is a story for people who are part of those churches and experiencing the profound loss, the painful heartbreak, and the intense frustration that always comes with change. This is the story of what happened at First Baptist, the rise, ruin, and restoration of one of America's great churches. In the spring of 2020, things were not going well in our revitalization effort at First Baptist Church. We had initiated a plan to rein in expenses and refocus our mission. We called it Operation Right Size. The plan was to reduce our footprint in terms of space and in terms of personnel. The plan was to realign our budget so that we were spending money within our means. And the bigger part of the plan, as I've shared in earlier episodes, was to refocus our vision on the Great Commission, to focus on Jesus, to focus on reaching Jacksonville and cultivating 7 core values and accomplishing 5 key objectives. That was the plan that we were launching. I was trying to get everybody excited about the Great Commission and being on mission for Jesus Christ. And then everything started to go wrong. The thing everybody was aware of in the culture was the COVID pandemic, which hit in the spring of 2020.
Now to growing concerns about the deadly coronavirus officially hitting the U.S. Here's what we know.
This brought a halt to any ministry momentum.
Officials now say more than 400 people have been sickened and 9 people have died.
COVID brought a halt to ministry momentum in every church and in every ministry across the country. So in that sense, our problems at First Baptist were not unique. What made our problems unique at First Baptist with COVID was that we went into COVID fighting for our life. We were not approaching COVID from a standpoint of ministry strength, but from a standpoint of ministry weakness. We had no momentum going into COVID. I was trying to create momentum with the refocusing of vision and mission, and COVID interrupted every bit of that. The problem of a loss of momentum might have been felt the most at our Nocatee campus. We have a remarkably faithful campus pastor named Spencer Harmon, and I talked with him about this, and here's what he said.
We were over 400 people regularly. The main thing we were seeing was just young families joining the church, tons of kids, not enough space, all that, real exciting problems. And then COVID hits and completely resets everything. I remember it was March 13th. That was the last Sunday. And I preached. You were still preaching in Nocatee at that time, and so you had to be downtown. And I preached, and I remember it was so empty in the room that I preached from the floor. I was like, put the podium on the floor because it just feels, how it feels awkward, it's just like I feel removed from everybody. So I was like, I'm just going to preach from the floor, and we're just going to, and there was like 90 people at church. And I remember preaching a sermon and thinking like, I don't know if I'm going to see these people again. No one knew anything about COVID at that time. Everyone thought they were going to die. It's true. They were saying 2 million people were going to die.
That's the reason we closed up.
Yeah.
We're all going to die.
We're all going to die. And so I remember we were still in pencil about whether or not we would have the service the next week. So COVID happens. We go online. We were like, look, we just need one preacher right now. That's going to be Heath. We just tabled all of our in-person preaching plan. Everything got tabled, you know? So we get back to Nocatee, and I remember we were like, we just need stable, one voice. So you were preaching at Nocatee right after COVID. We just started like our vision series too. It was like the worst timing ever.
It was terrible.
You come back and you come back to preach at Nocatee, and there's like 120 people at church.
Yeah.
And it's just like, we're right back where we started.
But none of that for the larger church was the largest problem we were dealing with COVID. The most significant problem we had with COVID was that it halted our property sale. The right sizing of our property and the construction and remodel project on our one block plan was predicated upon the sale of property that was going to generate tens of millions of dollars. And the recession in the commercial real estate market in Jacksonville in 2020, brought on by the COVID pandemic, meant that all of the interested buyers in our property evaporated, and we were sitting there without any real plan to produce the kind of revenue we needed to make the changes that were required. So the COVID pandemic was making things really hard and was requiring a massive revision in the plans that we had made. Also, in the spring of 2020, we went through a massive reduction in force. I mentioned in earlier episodes that we had a staff of over 220 people, and we could not find anybody, none of the leaders on our team, no expert that we talked to that thought we needed more than about 100. And so we went through a reduction in force of over 120 people. Almost all of those were through layoffs, but a few people did quit. And there was, I need to be honest, a little bit of a blessing in disguise in the timing in that. That reduction in force took place in February of 2020, and that allowed us to go into the COVID recession very lean. If we had needed to carry all of those 120 employees, I don't know how our church would have made it financially. So there was a blessing in disguise. We didn't know COVID was coming, and this helped us go into COVID with a more affordable personnel budget. But mostly, it was brutal. Mostly, it was one of the hardest things any of us went through. The reality is that on a church staff, every member of the team has a constituency. Everybody has people that they're in relationship with. Everybody has people that are going to be hurt by their departure. And even when people understand the logic that we can't afford all these people, we don't need all these people, it is wrong that the church go under trying to keep people employed. Even when people understand that logic abstractly, it hits close to home and is very personal when the person they love is affected by the layoff. And so we understand that personal pain that comes in personal relationship with the loss of a job. What also happens, however, is that ungodly people weaponize that pain. Ungodly people who care more about their job and their money than about church and about Jesus's mission, they will weaponize that and use that pain to try to hurt the people that they believe hurt them. Those people who were upset could say anything they wanted to say and did say anything they wanted to say about what happened with them and how they were treated. And those of us in leadership who bear legal and financial responsibility for the health of the church, we could not respond to that in any way. I was dealing with some medical challenges at the time that I'll talk about in a minute, and needed to announce to our church that I was going to have to take a month off to have brain surgery. Before I made that announcement to the church, I needed to make that announcement to the staff. So I made this announcement to our staff, asked them to keep it confidential so that the church could hear about it from me. And within 24 hours of making that announcement to the staff, there was an anonymous account on Facebook that made reference to that surgery. These anonymous accounts are dangerous. It allows somebody to keep their identity private, keep their information private while purporting to have all sorts of information about other people. There's no accountability as they share this information, but they just get to say whatever they want. Sean Perrone, the associate pastor at First Baptist Church, was serving at that time, and I asked him what he thought about this, and here's what he said.
There was an extended season where it was a regular occurrence that I would receive screenshots of social media posts from all number of people. And they would say, "Did you see this? Have you seen this? Oh my goodness, look at this." And it would be a screenshot that included some sort of either slanderous or negative take or painful statement about the things that we were doing at the church. And those statements, I would say, probably reached their climax when we came to the time of your brain surgery. And the one post in particular that was probably the most shocking was where this anonymous account posted about the scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz that said something like, "If I only had a brain," or "If he only had a brain." And what made that so painful is the uncertainty of the future with you. And following that is when the post was made, no one was supposed to know about it. It was very, very confidential. Only the staff had been told. And it was alarming, not just in the level of darkness and insensitivity, but also at the level of, oh my goodness, no one was supposed to know about this. And now who do we trust? How can we trust anyone when something so personal and so painful has now been leaked and said in the most sinister way possible? That's probably the height of the Facebook posts and the slander and pain, but there were many, many more that continued to be a daily occurrence that honestly, I became used to it.
I had this nerve problem in my brain that was really causing me a lot of problems. I was having trouble keeping my eyes open. When I would have these spasms, I couldn't keep them open. I was having trouble talking, trouble chewing, trouble swallowing. If they don't fix this problem, you wind up having to go on disability. You can't be a pastor that can't speak. If you can't chew and swallow, that's a change of life difficulty. You can't drive if you can't keep your eyes open. So these spasms were causing real concern about my ability to continue with life as I knew it into the future. And also because of all the stress, my blood pressure was through the roof. I was going to doctor's appointments to get evaluated for my nerve trouble, and they were taking my blood pressure and they were saying, "Your blood pressure's through the roof." There were times when I got my blood pressure checked, they said, "Hey, you need to monitor this real carefully." And so I'd go to, anytime you're at CVS or anytime you're at the store, just put your arm in that blood pressure cuff and see how you're doing. And there'd be times that I would do that and you'd read the rating on the side of the machine and my blood pressure was at the go to the emergency room level. It was dangerous and a stressful season. And while all that was happening, I got 2 really good job offers. Since I moved to Jacksonville, I've had 2 standing job offers, but then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I got these other really good job offers. And it seemed like maybe a sign. Like, is this the Lord telling us that it's time to go? What's the faithful thing to do here? And right at that same moment, I had 3 friends from around the country reach out to me at separate times and in separate ways and say, "Heath, it's time to think about going." Various reasons were given. Your health is too fragile. If you have a stroke and die or are disabled, you're not going to do anybody any good. Some friends saying, "These people are crazy and they are destroying your reputation. You need to get out before they end your kingdom usefulness into the future." So various reasons, various arguments, but wise, trusted friends who loved me, who stood to gain nothing if I left, were saying, maybe it's time to think about this. And with all that, I realized I had a decision to make. And here's what I want to say to you. In times like these, everybody at the church going through revitalization is going to have a decision to make. I'm telling you my story because the only story I have to tell is mine, but there were many church members who were under different kinds of pressure, but an equal amount of pressure. Do we stay or do we go? Every leader who is leading through a time of transition is going to reach the moment where you have to decide, can I see this through, or is it time to go do something else? At a certain point, everyone is going to be confronted with whether they need to stay or go. And this episode is about sorting that issue through. Let me start by owning the reality that staying is hard. In any significant ministry transition, in any significant revitalization effort, there will come a moment where the easiest thing to do would be to leave. And staying is going to take an overwhelming act of the will. It's going to take an overwhelming act of grace because it's hard to do it. Why is it so hard to stay? Well, first of all, everything's changing. Everything is changing. We talked about this a little bit in episode 3, but here what I'm talking about is at your church that you have loved for so long, everything is just different. An example of how things were different at First Baptist in late 2019 and in early 2020 would be to think of just the fact that our property was for sale. We had blocks under construction. Sunday school classes had been rearranged and combined while we were trying to use temporary space as we waited the permanent space to get completed. The childcare apparatus was completely different. We'd laid off dozens of childcare workers and were asking our church to do what they needed to do, which was to volunteer to take care of our children. But that was a completely different change that folks weren't used to. Because staff had been laid off, things were different. Because the systems had changed, things were different. And it just was hard. Everything was changing and different, and it made it complicated. It's also hard to stay because your friends are leaving. Church is about relationships. And when those relationships are fraying and ending and distancing, it makes things very, very hard. Here's the thing. Also, everything about church is hard. And we don't come to church, most people don't come to church with the expectation that it will be hard. Most people are living hard lives out there in the world. They're having difficulty at work and difficulty at home and difficulty with kids and difficulty with friendships. And they actually come to church to get a break from those hardships. And when now all of a sudden church is hard, one of my main reasons for going is evaporating. It makes it difficult. Also, it's hard to stay because staying can damage your reputation. It's true for pastors who are being attacked and lied about, but it's true for other people as well. It's true for members. There were many godly lay leaders in our congregation who were accused of being wicked men and women because they supported me and because they supported the changes that we were trying to create. We had members who lost business because they defended me. People said, well, hey, if you're going to go to that church, if you're going to listen to that guy, then you can't have our business anymore. One of our members actually had his boss pull him aside, and he had heard some of the rumors going around about the church. And he knew that his employee was a lay leader in the church, and he just said, man, I'm concerned about you and your reputation, and you don't need to go down with this church. I mean, it can damage your reputation. So it is really, really hard to stay, and I don't want to make it sound like it's different than that. True as it is that it's hard to stay, I think you should really try to stay. And let me tell you why, whoever you are, why you should try to stay. First of all, you read the New Testament, and you find out that leaving a church at any point is a big deal. There are not many reasons in the New Testament why somebody leaves their church. You leave your church because you're relocating. You leave your church because you're going to do new and different ministry. You leave your church because of persistent sin and faithlessness. But that's really about it. There's not a lot of really great reasons to leave your church. And so you don't need to take leaving your church lightly. The New Testament sure doesn't. One of the reasons why it's such a big deal to leave a church is because this is your family of faith. This is why you need to try and stay. The Bible talks about the church like family. You don't just walk out on your physical family, and you should not walk out on your spiritual family. You don't want to be an unloving, uncommitted family member. Church is different when you think about it like a thing you do on Sunday versus when you say, these are my brothers and my sisters. This is my faith family. And you need to try to stay with your family if you can at all. Another reason you should try to stay is because if you leave, you are going to leave one imperfect place to go to another imperfect place. Your church is struggling right now, but it's going to get better. These hard times won't last forever. At a certain point, you're going to turn the corner and things are going to improve, and you don't want to miss the blessings on the other side of that turning of the corner. You certainly don't want to do it to get to another church just in time to walk through a difficulty at that place, which is certainly going to happen. So there is no perfect church. The church you're at is imperfect, and the church you might go to is imperfect, and you're going to have problems at that place just as much as you will at the current one. Another reason to try to stay is because it's never wise to make a decision in the fog of war. Listen, when your church is going through a transition, through a revitalization effort, there is so much happening, there's so much changing, and everything is unclear. This is not the context to make a sober-minded decision. It'd be better to wait things out, to see where things are headed, to get a look at the situation in the clear light of day when the fog of the transition and rumor and innuendo, when that all dissipates, you can make a better, clearer decision in the long term than you can in the short term. Another reason you should try to stay is because you might not intend it, but your departure will be used by enemies of the gospel and enemies of the church to do damage to the church. We had dear, sweet people who loved our church and left our church, actually for all sorts of reasons. Dear, sweet people who left because they did relocate to another city. Dear, sweet people who relocated because they had a parent that lived in a different part of town whose health was failing and they needed to help them get to church. And their departure, even for well-intended reasons, completely disconnected to anything happening at the church, it was paraded as an example of just how bad things are. And see, well, if they're leaving over this, then you know things are bad. You've heard from Brent Blanchett, a faithful member of our congregation, and he talked about this reality as one of the reasons why he stayed, and here's what he said.
So probably the lowest point for us was seeing a lot of the families that we grew up with and respected just leave the church. Mm-hmm. You know, these are people that, again, through experience, we knew they loved the church and they loved Jesus, and we didn't understand why they would just transfer their membership.
Another reason to stay is that you may, in the clear light of day, when the danger dissipates, really regret your decision. This has happened at First Baptist already, where people left in the fog of war. They made a decision based on less than all the facts. And now I talk to people and they're like, we're so sorry we left. We missed our church. We made a wrong decision and we're so sorry. And now what do we do? And one of the things that I'm able to do is I'm able to leave where people go to church in the sovereignty of God. And I'm able to say, well, you're welcome to come back if you want, and everybody loves you and nobody's going to think anything bad about you. But we also understand if you've made commitments at your new place and you need to serve faithfully there. But the point is, you may regret this decision. When you see it in the clear light of day, you may be really sorry for a decision you made when things were unclear. A final reason I'll mention as for why you should try to stay is that your presence could be the very thing that will help the church turn the corner. This is a hard reason to embrace for people who think of church like consumers. You approach church the way you approach getting beverages in the soda aisle at the grocery store. Well, I like this. I don't like that. That has a little funky taste. I'm not going to do that. I think I like this color. You're picking and choosing like items from a grocery store aisle. That's not the way the New Testament would have us to think about church. Jesus wants us to think about church like servants. It's our job to serve in the local church. We don't go to church merely for what we can get. We go to church for what we can give, how we can make a contribution. Your church needs you. Your church needs you, especially when it's going through a hard time. What is wrong with Christians? With people who serve Jesus, who came to be a servant and give his life for his people. What is going on with Christians when we leave our church when the church needs us the most? I would encourage you not to do that, but to view a time of trouble and transition at your congregation as a time when you are going to redouble your efforts, redouble your commitments, and help them out. And who knows that your investment might be the very thing that helps them turn the corner and helps them have stories of success to share later. I really think you should try and stay. But none of that means that it might not be time to leave. As a matter of fact, it might be that in the plan of God, the Lord is using the transition and the tumult at your church to lead you to a different church. And there are a couple of reasons why it might really be time for you to leave. The church could have changed beyond anything you signed up for. Now, here I'm not talking about issues of fundamental faithfulness. If the church gets faithless, if they step away from Jesus, if they step away from the Bible, if they step away from grace, if faithfulness is compromised, you have to leave. It's not even a choice. You are not permitted to go to a church that's not centered on Christ and based on His Word. I'm not talking about issues of fundamental faithfulness. I'm talking about the personal nature of making a selection about church. If you are in a typical town in the United States of America, there are a number of churches in your area that are very faithful. In any one of them, you could say, hey, they're centered on Christ, they're based on the Bible, they preach salvation by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, and you could go in that faithful way to any one of them, but you're making decisions on a more personal level, on some preferences that you really like and enjoy and appreciate. Everybody chooses the church they attend based on those personal factors. If you came to the church where you are based on some of those personal factors, and those things have changed now beyond what anything you recognize, and you would say, hey, this church is pursuing Jesus, it's pursuing the Bible, but this just isn't the church we would go to if we had it all to do over again. It's different than what you signed up for. You might need to relocate. You might need to find a church that suits you and suits your family better. Also, though you should try to stay, though you love your church and want to be committed to it, right now, things could just be too painful. There are 119 reasons why the fight that the church is enduring right now just can't be your fight at this season in your life. Maybe your family is being chewed up and spat out. Maybe your kids are overwhelmed with doubt and questions about everything that's going on. And being a leader in your home means prioritizing the people you're living with versus the people you're doing church with. Maybe you are not growing in your relationship with Jesus and you're too distracted by all the conflict and all the change to be able to focus on that, and you need to go to a place where you can really grow in Jesus. Those are really good reasons why it might be time for you to go, even though there should be an instinct to stay. When this happened at First Baptist Church, we called it collateral damage. This was the kind of damage we experienced from good folks who were supportive and loved us, but they just couldn't do this right now. I talked to Scott Cannell, our pastor of music and worship, about this issue, and this was his observation.
They began to line up in those different places. And so we ended up with, I think, broadly 3 groups of people, but they would be represented by multiples within those 3 groups. We had a group that was wrestling for control of the steering wheel that had no business to have their hands on the steering wheel. We had a group that was trying to get behind your leadership and say, we're going to follow him, and whatever he's doing is what we're doing. And then you had innocent bystanders in the middle, the collateral damage of a split. Those folks are the ones that I still feel the worst for, because they were just trying to be good Christians in a church that they had loved, and they just began to see dissension and fighting, and then social media began to give clarity to what some of these issues were, and they just decided, I can't. Life's too hard to be a part of a church where this become a battlefield.
Sometimes you just can't do it. Sometimes everybody else's fight can't be your fight. You really should try to stay, but sometimes you just can't. And that means we need to talk about not just whether to leave, but how to leave. If you just have to leave, then there are some things you need to keep in mind. Listen, a lot of people left First Baptist in really painful and really sinful ways. A lot of folks at your church are going to leave in really painful and really sinful ways. If you decide it's time to go, you need to be very, very careful, because how you do it is crucial. It could strengthen or weaken your testimony. It could strengthen or weaken the church you're leaving, and it could strengthen or weaken the church you are going to. So you need to be very careful if you're going to leave about how you do it. Here's a few guidelines to keep in mind. First of all, leave lovingly. Leave in a spirit of love and compassion. If you are angry and you are leaving to destroy, that is your problem and your sin. Regardless of what is going on at your church, regardless of what's happening in the transition, you are called by Jesus Christ to love people. If you're angry with somebody, it's your problem. You are not ready to leave if you are still harboring bitterness. The worst case scenario at your congregation is that the leader that you're frustrated with, the leader who's doing the things you hate, is just as bad as everybody says. He's the worst pastor in the history of Christianity. He is an enemy of the gospel. He is your enemy. And in that worst case scenario, Jesus Christ still says you got to love him. In Matthew 5:43-44, it says, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." If you're a Christian, you are allowed to have an enemy, but you're not allowed to be an enemy. And if you are cherishing anger in your heart, if you are cherishing bitterness in your heart, then that is on you, and you are not ready to leave until it's fixed. So leave lovingly. Second guideline is leave peacefully. This is very related to the first one. First of all, you got to put away anger and bitterness. But then before you leave, you got to leave peacefully. If you are at odds with people in your church, if there are relationships that are broken, then it is up to you to be restored to that person. Romans chapter 12, verse 18 says, "If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all." This is God making it your responsibility to live at peace and to leave peacefully. As I said in a previous podcast, I have offered to meet and be reconciled with anyone who is upset with me. The statement that I have made over and over again is I will meet with anybody, anywhere, with anyone they want present. That is a matter of record in our personnel area. That's a matter of conscience with the many people who have heard me say it to them or that I have written to and said that to. Most people have not done that. Instead, what they do is leave horrible accusations online. They insinuate the terrible things that have happened. They say, nobody knows the truth. Nobody knows what I know. You can find accusations online where people talking about I should be in jail. Mostly what happens is people just don't speak to you anymore. Here's what I have had to come to understand. The person who won't meet and be reconciled is the problem. Again, the worst case scenario is the leader, the person you're angry with, is just as bad as you believe them to be. And it's still your responsibility to go to them and seek to be reconciled and to seek to live at peace. Jesus' command still comes to you no matter how bad they are. This is up to you. If you try to meet and are refused, that's a whole other matter. But until you are refused and it's no longer up to you, insofar as it depends on you, you've got to live peaceably with all people. Leave lovingly, leave peacefully, and finally, leave quietly. If you have to leave, do it with honor, do it with care, and do it quietly. We live in a social media world that makes this very, very hard. We live in a social media world where people call themselves Christians, but they play by the rules of social media attack more than they play by the rules of Scripture. They have an instinct to put ugly posts online. They have an instinct to weaponize other churches against the churches that they are leaving. They put all this on social media. And listen, there's a lesson here about how you need to process social media posts. I'm very careful about what I read on social media. In fact, I don't read social media very often. I will often post to social media but not read it because so much of it is poison. I'll have people send me screenshots of a social media post where somebody is standing in front of a church, the church they're going to, and they're like, man, we're so glad to be at this church and not that horrible church we left. And people making these terrible accusations, and they'll say, should we believe this? And the answer to that question is, of course you shouldn't believe it. By the time somebody is posting an ugly statement online, they are showing you that they cannot be trusted with the information they're sharing. Because Jesus says you're supposed to go to your brother. Jesus does not say you're supposed to post about your brother. You're supposed to accuse your brother. Jesus says you're supposed to go to your brother and be reconciled. And a person who is behaving that way is actually demonstrating that they are the one who is untrustworthy. No, if you need to leave, you need to leave quietly. You can trust the Lord to take care of whatever problem you're concerned about. You don't need to grab the wheel and destroy something that Jesus might be doing. Listen, not every effort at change is good. Some things don't need to change. Some things need to remain the same. We talked about that in a previous episode. Here, I want to be honest that not all ideas are awesome. I had some bad ideas along the way. Some ideas that didn't work, some ideas that needed to be tossed in the trash can, some ideas that needed to be changed and amended. But when you disagree with an idea, how do you do that? Jesus says in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, that you speak out of the abundance of your heart. Listen to the talk of people in a transition. Listen to what comes out of your mouth in a transition and consider it a test of your heart. Can you identify a bad idea with grace and wisdom, but point the way forward to a different, better idea? Or do you spread lies? Do you spread gossip? Whichever one of those is a revelation of your heart. Faithful people reveal their hearts in transitions, and faithless people reveal their hearts in transitions. God is testing you. How are you going to respond to the change? Will you believe everything you hear? Will you allow disappointment to morph into a desire to destroy? Will you seek to demolish in a few months what you have participated in building over the course of years? Will you trust God when you don't get your preference? Or will you demand that it be your own way? Will you remember the words of Jesus Christ to Saul on the Damascus Road when he said in Acts 9:4, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Do you realize that all the darts you throw against the church you're unhappy with are darts against Jesus himself? This change is a test of your heart. God is finding out what you are made of. You will discover who you are. Jesus is going to reveal that to you, and that is the point. God is changing your church. He's changing your people. and he is changing you. God is expanding his kingdom through this great, painful, powerful work. God is including you in the great story he's been writing across the ages. When we think about ministry and being a part of what God is doing, we like to think of the glorious parts of the story, and we forget that that story is rarely easy. There are moments of glory, there are moments of victory, there are memories of greatness, but along the way, there is a lot of hard, difficult, excruciating pain. But that hardship is when God shows up and makes you strong. And in that hardship, we can take heart, because in the Bible and in church history, every great work of God always follows a season of tremendous difficulty. This is true without exception. There is no splitting of the Red Sea in Exodus from Egypt without slavery in Egypt. There is no King David without first a King Saul. There is no resurrection on Sunday without first a crucifixion on Friday. Without exception, God's greatest works always follow great seasons of sorrow, sadness, suffering, and pain. The hard trial you're going through in this difficult season right now is the season you're experiencing before an explosive season of growth and faithfulness. You'll get to see it. It will be better than you can imagine. And the season of difficulty you're going through right now will protect you from boasting when the good times come. In that great and wonderful time, you will not be tempted to pat yourself on the back and give yourself credit. You will be tempted and you will exult in giving glory and honor and praise to the one who preserved you in the valley and gave you faithfulness. There's going to be a lot of good stories to tell about what God is doing in your ministry. As I interviewed dozens of church members from First Baptist who endured the hard days, and I asked them, tell me what is true about First Baptist now. Tell me what the good things are that God has done on the other side of the difficulty. For people who haven't been here in 2 years or 20 years, tell me what they need to know about First Baptist. And they gave remarkable stories of God's grace and God's faithfulness through the revitalization of First Baptist Church. As we end this episode, I want you to hear the testimony of faithful people from First Baptist Church about what God has done through the revitalization of First Baptist Church. Something that you just said about your mom is something I want to ask you about. So, and even just thinking about what I was saying about your granddad a minute ago, and I've just prayed like, Lord, I'd love to be a man like that. I want to have that kind of heart. I want to be that kind of pastor. I want to be that kind of leader. And
you figure he was 37 when he came here. Mm-hmm. So you're right there.
Right there, yeah.
But look how many years it took for him to grow in the Lord.
Yeah.
You know, all the difficulties that I don't know about that he went through.
Yeah, because he wasn't spilling the beans.
Right. I was thrilled. It just seemed like the right fix.
Yeah.
Boy, I tell you, change is very hard.
That's true. It's true.
But I love my church. And people are shocked when they say, are you still at First Baptist? Yes, I am. That's my church. Those are my friends. That's where I want to be. I love those people.
What is going on at our church right now that excites and encourages you?
Well, I think I mentioned a while ago, it's seeing people that are coming. Mm-hmm. There's new people coming in and out of the Sunday school class. Every week there's someone sort of new and different. What brought you here? Or it's people that hadn't been back to church in forever that they're coming. And it's just exciting.
You've been here a long time. We've covered from the 1970s to 2022. Anything you want to say about First Baptist, about observations you've got? What do you want to throw in at the end?
Oh my goodness, Heath. I wish I'd have known these questions before I could have thought. I say this probably more than people want to hear, but this is a special place to me. These buildings are even special to me. Mm-hmm. I don't like to see people abuse them. Mm-hmm. I'm almost offended if I feel like they're not kept properly and if it's not cleaned right and if the grounds don't look pristine because it's just a special place because we have a great investment I mean, personally.
Yeah,
just
you do.
Larry and ourselves, just personally.
Yeah.
But it's set apart for something so special. And it's just, I love it. I love the people here. That's where my life just sort of revolves around First Baptist Church and the people, the friendships.
It is amazing to see multi-generational, 3 and 4 generations of families worshiping here. You know, we're not focused on millennials, we're not focused on seniors, we're not focused on children, we're focused on everybody. It's all of Jacksonville with all of Jesus for all of life. That's sustainable. That's the gospel. The gospel is not exclusive to a certain age or a certain people. I'm excited about the outreach that we can have to any generation at any time.
What's been neat to see now, almost 5 years in now, and by the time this airs, it will be 5 years. Some of those people have come back because they've recognized that while they were smelling smoke and hearing the sounds of fire, it was not what it seemed. And now that they see the rest of the story, they want to be back where those relationships are.
Talk about First Baptist now.
Yes, the best place to be. First Baptist Church. It is not what it was even 5 years ago. If it continued to be what it was 5 years ago, it would not exist today, not in any meaningful way. But First Baptist today, we've reached, in my opinion, the bottom of the graph, and we are now trending upward. We're seeing renewed attendance, we're seeing new people, we're seeing growth, we're seeing lots of young people, but we're also seeing the stalwart commitment of senior saints who hung in here through it. And I kind of love that because they've been through a lot. Some of these people that have been here 40 and 50 and 60 years kind of viewed what just happened as, oh yeah, this happens sometimes. Not everyone was that way, but some of those senior saints were like, okay, my Sunday school class is here. I'm just going to go open the Bible and learn and grow. There's a sweet multi-generational pursuit of godliness here that isn't profoundly indicative of the grace of God, that looked upon a downtown church that I think most of humankind, including many consultants that we talked to, would have said, you're dead in the water and there's no reason for you to stay there.
That's right.
God's doing something very different. He's defying the odds at a downtown location with a mega church that is not seeing the numbers of people that were seen 20 and 30 years ago. But I don't think the fruit of ministry is any less. And I think in some ways we could argue the fruit is actually increasing and may be the most we've ever seen.
How would you describe First Baptist to somebody who hadn't been here in a while?
The first thing that always jumps out at me, and you see it often, like when, and maybe let's even back up to what happened, social media. It's awful. Social media is awful. And like when a picture showed up on social media of them taking the pews out of the old auditorium, or them having this art exhibit in that auditorium, a lot of the old crowd all just say, oh, that's just so sad. Oh, that just breaks my heart to see it. And my thought is, show up here one Wednesday night. Show up here one Sunday.
Yeah.
You're not going to be sad at all. You're going to be thrilled at seeing what's going on. And I mean, I'm not trying to blow smoke or anything, but like the excitement that I feel now on a Wednesday that, wow, I get to come down to church, and the energy and the love that I feel walking into the dining area and all of that, it reminds me so much of those early 70s. People they're thrilled to be here.
But whether it's been a few years and they're in Jacksonville or it's been decades and they're overseas, what would you say to somebody who hasn't been to First Baptist in the last couple of years? How would you just, because it's a different place.
It's a different place.
How would you describe it?
I think that whatever your preconceived notions about what First Baptist is, if you haven't been here in the past 3 years, you don't know. You just don't know. It's different. I mean, I grew up in a super legalistic church, and there was lots of rules, and there was lots of things that we did, that we were taught, that were good intentioned, but maybe not correct. And I think that's what a lot of people's experience with First Baptist is. This is the place of rules and condemnation. And you come here to look perfect. I go to First Baptist. I think that's what a lot of people still think this is. And it's not. It's come here. First Baptist is actually a church where we're all wanting to grow to be like Christ. I think that's what I feel more than anything, is that I think our pastors care, like not just about numbers and how many people are here, and that they actually care about the people who are here and what their relationship with the Lord is like, and teaching us not just why we believe what we believe, and not just these are the things that you believe. I wasn't taught like that growing up. But it's not just pastors, it's all staff. It's a discipleship of those of us who are here, like wanting us to grow in our walk with the Lord. It's not about that we're all here because we're perfect. We're all here because we are sinners.
What I would say is that this church has rekindled its love for Christ and its love for the city of Jacksonville in a way that is undeniable the moment you walk in. Numbers of attendance are ever-changing in every church across America and throughout the world. But what's important is that this church loves Christ, and they love the city, and they want to reach Jacksonville for Christ. And if you want to do that, this is the place to be.
Tell us some of the exciting things the Lord's doing at Nocatee.
We have a very young staff. They could be my kids. It makes me feel so old to say that, but they could. And I love every one of them.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to serve with them. Each one, to a person, loves Jesus. They love the Bible. They are church people through and through. They are shepherding that flock. We have a sweet congregation of people, and I'll tell you, God is bringing people to Nocatee. Every week we have multitudes of families that are new to the area, and they're looking for church homes. And so it's been great to meet these people from all over the country that God has saved and brought here, and they're interested in a Bible teaching church, and they want to immerse themselves in the ministry at Nocatee. So it's fresh, it's growing, it's in that cycle of organizations where it's in a growth cycle.
The people who have rode it out at First Baptist, all the transition, the people who have rode it out, I think are more focused on Jesus and more focused on ministry than they've ever been. Because the bubble of pastors and following personalities and having a big church and all the great things about our history, that was popped through COVID and through all the transitions. For those who didn't get jaded by it, I think what those people did is it turned their gaze to like, okay, Jesus never changes. Jesus is the leader of this church, and he's brought these guys here to lead during this time. And so since I love Jesus, I love them, and we're moving forward, and we're focused on ministry. And I see a greater joy and focus on ministry in our church members. And then the second thing I see is there's just new people coming.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think that maybe in 5 years, there will just be a handful of people that can tell these stories. I think it's important to tell them. But, I mean, the membership of Nocatee from 2019 to now has almost completely flipped. And so there's just a new group of people here, and they're trying to reach all of Jacksonville with all of Jesus for all of life, and they're excited about ministry, and they're excited about the gospel, and they're excited about discipleship, and their kids being discipled. And I think that was there before, but now that we've walked through this, I think there's a sharper focus on it and an energy behind it that's really exciting, and I'm excited to see what the Lord does with it.